Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Fascinating to hear just everyone evolve with the data. Certainly the markets are today, and to hear the former St. Louis Fed president say the soft landing for the U.S. economy is in view is something that we are obviously going to hear. That's the kind of news that the White House wants to listen to. And following this jobs data this morning, we may be in a different world. It certainly feels like it than we were 24 hours ago, certainly coming off of the Fed meeting and some of the more recent data that we've seen on GDP and jobs. Mark Hamrick joins us now, I'm glad to say, from our Washington Bureau, the Bankrate Washington Bureau Chief. He's senior economic analyst at Bankrate and has been researching this jobs data for us. Mark, it's great to have you on Bloomberg. Welcome. The stuff that we were hearing just now from Jim Bullard reinforces this view that the Fed may actually stick the soft landing. How are you looking at this report today?
Good to be with you, Joe, and thanks for having me. I think what he's saying is very parallel to what the Fed chairman said just a few days ago, and that is there are a number of possible paths ahead, and some of those paths may well be constructive, meaning we avoid a hard landing, we avoid a contraction in the economy in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months, and that the hope is indeed aligned with the prayer that inflation will continue to come down. There are other paths, though, that could involve events that we can't even predict. And so what I think I would prefer to associate myself with in this discussion is the high degree of uncertainty, to acknowledge that there are multiple paths and that we don't have a high degree of certainty about a particular path.
Okay, so we're data dependent, as we have been. We're awfully used to that. But you can feel the shift in sentiment here. Can't you, Mark? Does that change your view?
Well, it's one day's worth of data, but obviously an important set of data.
Yeah.
And you can concoct a variety of paths just from today. For example, the payrolls number coming in with a gain of 175,000 jobs, that's a decline of 40% from the previous month's revised number. So you can come up with a scenario where that trajectory goes lower, that we get a much more pronounced slowing in the economy. I don't think that's the base case, but I would say broadly, this is a very well-balanced report, which does take sort of the hot plate of porridge out of the choice of 3 too hot, too cold, just right today alone, and we'll see what the next rounds of data bring us.
What are the next rounds that matter to you? Are we back to obsessing over CPI, or is it the jobs report that's kind of leading your view?
I think we're mostly obsessing about the consumer price index over the jobs report, and that's painful for me to say because I've always loved following the employment data. But when you're talking about the Fed prioritizing the part of the mandate with stable prices, although it was interesting to hear Chairman Powell this past week say, well, perhaps we need to be paying just a bit more attention now to maximum employment than we were before. I still think the CPI is the star of the show because there was nothing in the statement that led us to believe that we're going to be prioritizing the employment side. It is that we need greater confidence about coming down to that heavily talked about 2% target.
You're looking at average hourly earnings in this report. We've been with an eye on inflation, watching that number carefully, up 3.9% over the past year. Pay is exceeding inflation, which is a really good thing for Joe Biden to say. But how concerning could that be if this trend continues when we consider the possibility of a wage spiral, of this starting to become a vicious cycle where the Fed needs to worry again?
Well, I think, first of all, Chairman Powell's been pretty consistent, and I think the data supports the view that the job market has not been the primary cause of inflation in the sense of wage growth leading that. We know the imbalance between supply and demand broadly in the supply chains really fed that. The war against Ukraine was another straw to sort of break that camel's back. And we had a decline in the sort of month over month annualized look at average hourly earnings. So we're not above 4% as we were before. We're at 3.9. So I think it's reasonable to expect that with this moderation or normalization we have in the job market, that we will not have a wage price spiral. We had a number of things seasonally occurring at the beginning of the year with 22 states, dozens of localities raising their minimum wages. That had to have been affecting the data. And we know there were a number of negotiated settlements involving unions that also probably lifted some of that. So I would look at some of that as being seasonal or temporary, and that would probably be consistent with numbers that are not as high going forward.
Got it. We're spending time with Mark Hamrick from Bankrate here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube. If you want to find us now, go to YouTube, search Bloomberg Global News. You'll see Mark Hamrick's palatial office while you're at it. Mark, what's the most stubborn problem here in the inflation conversation? I know you're watching oil. It's a little bit of a wild card, but shelter has been a real problem here moving forward. It just doesn't want to budge.
Well, it seems to be services excluding shelter because, as the chairman said this week, the rents data, as it's measured, doesn't seem to be matching what's happening in the marketplace. And so it is expected that as we get essentially the shelter part of all this sort of better reflected in the data, that the CPI in the shelter component as well as services more broadly may behave better. But we know, for example, there are all kinds of almost extraordinary things going on in the economy that may not relent. And I would point to things like the extraordinary increases in the cost of car insurance that are caused by a number of different factors, but climate change is part of that. Some of them are sort of post-pandemic impacts of people not seeming to be able to drive very well anymore, but also the sharp rise in car prices and the extraordinary costs associated with repairing a car. So I obviously still on the services side, but we do need to see more disinflation resume on the goods side. And if we can get alignment, for the most part on both of those, we might be in a better shape. And I think that's sort of the consensus expectation right now.
Well, I'm glad we could get some time with you today, Mark. Don't be a stranger. Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg. That's Mark Hamrick from Bankrate on this Jobs Day. I'm Joe Mathieu at World Headquarters in New York as we balance a couple of stories today, because in this city, Donald Trump is back in court. And so is Hope Hicks.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
This is a fascinating development here in the criminal trial, the former president, hush money trial, of course, that's now underway. Hope Hicks, one of his closest associates over the years, a personal assistant who was always there to take care of Donald Trump, is now testifying against him, speaking as we speak about the day she learned of the Access Hollywood tapes. Quite remarkable, she said. After getting the email about the tape, she went to the 25th floor of Trump Tower to talk about it. Donald Trump was doing debate prep at that moment in a conference room with Jason Miller, Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, and his no longer friend, Chris Christie. She verbally explained the email, she said, to Trump, and the group sought to, quote, absorb the shock of it, unquote. We're joined in studio here in New York right now in the throes of this conversation by Dave Aronberg. Yes, the Palm Beach County State Attorney is here and with us in studio. It's great to see you, sir. What a treat.
Great to be back with you, Joe.
Absolutely. I don't know what's got you in Manhattan, but we're watching this trial unfold here, and I believe you made clear already at one point that Hope Hicks could be the slam dunk testimony for the prosecution. What are we learning so far?
Well, at first she started by saying she doesn't remember being in the room where they had that discussion between Pecker, Cohen, and anyone else in the room at the time. I think it was and Trump himself, back in August 2015, where everything hit the fan. They were trying to plan a strategy to suppress these bad stories. Now, that's troubling that she doesn't remember that. How do you not remember being in that meeting? You would think you'd remember that. She does remember, though, being on a conference call, on calls with these players. So she's going to help the prosecution, but perhaps not as much as the state thought.
What do they want to hear from her today? When is the job done?
They want to hear corroboration that Trump was part of the scheme and that this scheme was in response to the Access Hollywood tape. Because after that came out, people thought the campaign was doomed, and they couldn't afford another Stormy Daniels to come out where there was more trash about Trump. And so that's why they entered into the scheme to influence the election, because prosecutors have to prove that not just there was a falsification of business records, but it concealed a campaign finance crime, and that would be the felony.
Is Hope Hicks' testimony then more credible than Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels because of her prior relationship with Donald Trump? That's been the conventional wisdom here.
Prior and current relationship.
Are they still close?
Well, they're not enemies. She has no axe to grind. I don't know how close they are, but she has no axe to grind. That's why she's powerful for the state. You see, the defense is going to try to discredit Michael Cohen, the key witness, by saying, you guys hate each other. Michael Cohen has prior felonies, all that stuff. They're going to try to discredit David Pecker by saying you're under a non-prosecution agreement. It's in your incentive to deal with the prosecutors and make up stuff. And they've already tried to discredit Keith Davidson, by saying, you're a sleazebag. You have sleazebag clients. You travel in this sleazy world of paparazzi. Of course, Trump traveled in that world too. But with Hope Hicks, what do they have? They have a loyalist who's trying to do the right thing, apparently, and tell the truth, although sometimes her memory seems to be faltering.
Got it. So what does cross-examination look like for her then?
They're going to try to poke holes in her testimony. They're probably going to treat her with kid gloves.
Yeah, okay.
And they're going to try to say, you don't remember this, you don't remember that, do you? Yes. And that's where they'll try to say, like, you can't rely on her to corroborate Michael Cohen when she doesn't remember a lot of these specifics.
How about that? There's a gag order ruling that we're waiting for, a second gag order ruling as well. 4 more violations alleged, the hearing yesterday. Does that mean another $4,000 check, which Donald Trump would probably write at dinner anyway? Yeah,
it's pocket change for him. As long as they're going to fine him, and they're pretty limited to how much they can fine him. They've got the statute for $1,000 per violation, and Judge Merchan is stuck. If he really wants to ratchet it up, he could put him in timeout. They have like a little holding cell inside that courtroom, inside the courthouse. Yeah, I don't think it'll go to that. I mean, but maybe. There's no way he's going to be incarcerated pre-trial, but could he be put in a room to sit there for a few hours?
Could he really do that, though? He's got the authority to do it. The Secret Service would have to have some kind of a sidebar, right? How would that work?
They could just put him in a room by himself.
Just give him an office and shut the door.
Yeah, right.
Time out.
That'll teach you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he should be treated like everyone else in my mind. I mean, if you violate a court's gag order, you should be sanctioned. Defendants in my courthouse, if they criticize the judge or witnesses,
so let's
or
talk
jurors,
about that.
you're done.
What done? You go to jail, but what if Joe Mathieu was standing in there and I said that this guy's a sleazebag and did all of that stuff? Is there a first warning? Do I start with a fine, or would you actually lock me up?
No, they would start with a fine and a strong warning. And if you continue to do it, you would be wearing
if
orange.
If I had 10 to 15 violations, that would be in jail.
Yeah, they'd fit you with some steel bracelets.
Okay, great. I mean, we do need to ask these questions, particularly as he talks about the weaponization of the justice system when he is, in fact, being treated better than anyone else would be.
His supporters say that there's a 2-tiered system of justice. I would agree, but not in the way they're thinking. I think he's being treated better. Any other defendant who did this continually and intentionally violated the court's gag order and went after the judge and his daughter, I mean, they'd be picking up trash on the side of the highway.
There seems to be a feeling, based on smarter minds than mine who come on this program, that this trial is not going to need 6 to 8 weeks, that we're moving along here. What do you think of the timeline at this point?
Judge Merchan is a no-nonsense judge. He's moving things along.
Yeah.
It is pretty telling when Trump was complaining that he can't be on the campaign trail because of this. This is not right. But on the same time, he's also complaining how quickly the trial is going. Mm-hmm. So, whatever it is, it's grievance on both sides. Too fast, too slow, it's too cold in the courtroom, whatever it is, he's being treated unfairly. Bottom line is judges matter, and Judge Merchan wants this thing to get finished sooner than later, and it will.
He made clear yesterday on Truth Social that he's not been sleeping. Did you see that in the courtroom?
He said
doesn't he's closing his beautiful blue eyes.
Yes, it's
and
very
taking it all in.
very poetic. He's got to keep up with images, right? He's the alpha male, and alpha males don't fall asleep during testimony, especially when he's calling the current president Sleepy Joe. You can't use that moniker if you're falling asleep while you're at your own trial.
I think I heard Sleepy Don at the White House Correspondents' dinner, right? That's already out there now.
Yes, I didn't know he had blue eyes, by the way.
Bottle. No, you didn't?
No, I didn't pay that close attention.
Well, I think that he said they're beautiful.
He did say they're beautiful.
Blue eyes, yeah. So maybe he'll be out of this thing sooner than he thinks. At what point when this trial, when the testimony resumes, how long will we wait for this to go to the jury? What's that process going to be like?
After the testimony is over, you'll have closing arguments, and then it goes to the jury right after the judge reads the jury instructions. And then we'll see if we can get a unanimous 12-member jury to agree on a verdict. It could be a hung jury, and I do think, though, it's very unlikely to be an acquittal. The evidence that I've seen, the witnesses I've seen, have been pretty powerful. So if I had to guess, I would say this is headed towards a conviction. Now, I don't think he's going to serve any prison time for this. I think he gets probation or maybe house arrest at most, but he'll appeal whatever the final verdict will be anyways.
If he's found guilty, though, and he's brought into the courthouse for all of that stuff, he is going to end up in a room at some point that day, right? I mean, what happens if he's found guilty and he's not given jail time? Does he just walk out of there and get in the SUV, or there's still going to be a long day for him to do whatever is done with the paperwork and the rest of it?
Yeah, he'll get processed, but he'll leave. He'll go home. He's not going to be remanded back into a jail cell.
Sure.
And then he'll come back for sentencing, which could take place a month later. Mm-hmm. And then the sentencing, I think, will not force him into jail. And even if they did say your sentence includes incarceration, he will appeal, and then the appeals will last well beyond the election.
Got it. You going to the courthouse now?
I'm flying home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, man, I'm going back to Palm Beach.
There's a big party in Palm Beach this weekend. You heard about that, right? Did you get invited?
At Mar-a-Lago?
The big Veep Steaks party.
Yeah, but somehow my invitation, I think, was lost in the mail.
Okay. I think is it in Hollywood, Florida? No, it's in Palm Beach. I didn't get mine either.
Yeah, also, I'm not eligible to be VP because if you come from the same state, it means your electoral votes in Florida will be tossed.
Marco Rubio is going to move to another state, is what I heard.
Yeah. If Marco Rubio is the VP nominee, I will eat my ID badge that they gave me today at Bloomberg.
If you're with us on YouTube, you see he's got the coolest pin in the room. Someday I want one of those with the badge. Dave Aronberg, Palm Beach County State Attorney. A great help to us getting through this legal saga, and it's great to see you in person, Dave, here in New York. Get home safe.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Mathieu at World Headquarters. This is Balance of Power as we add the voice of Tim O'Brien. What a perfect day to have the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, who, of course, wrote the book on Donald Trump. And, Tim, it's great to see you. Welcome back. What is it like for Donald Trump to see loyalists like Hope Hicks sit on the stand today?
Well, I think he has to weigh whether people who have traditionally been loyalists, Joe, are willing to sacrifice themselves to someone who's always viewed loyalty as a one-way street. And there are a lot of people around him who are loyal to him, but they haven't been tested in a courtroom. And I think one of the complications for Hope Hicks is she doesn't want to perjure herself in this trial. She really has nothing at stake because she was a message bearer for Donald Trump. But if she lied about things she knew about his relationship with either of the women, and there's material evidence that maybe what she said publicly was at odds with what was in email or other people witnessed, I think that she'll probably not want to toy with that reality and run into deeper trouble simply in the interest of being loyal to Donald Trump. So I assume she's speaking her mind up there. I've been following it. I was in the courtroom yesterday. I wasn't there today, and I'm following her testimony right now at a distance. And she seems to be proceeding apace, and I have to believe that absolutely rankles Donald Trump.
Did you say you were there yesterday, Tim?
Yeah, I've been at the courthouse several times now. Yeah, and I was there yesterday.
Well, take me into the courtroom. Especially with your view, what are you seeing that's compelling you?
The first thing to recognize, Joe, is this is the criminal court of the New York State Supreme Court, and both the civil and criminal branches of the court are very bonfire of the vanities venues, populated by judges with lots of different personalities.
Yeah.
And lots of cases have historically moved through those courtrooms that involve powerful names in New York and scandalous comings and goings. And this is probably one of the most epic cases in that context to ever roll through there. And there's a huge media gaggle every day. There are no Trump supporters at all. He's been saying people are outside protesting when I can't speak. And virtually like the only guy out there is a troubled man with a large bell and a cross and some verbiage about Trump on his T-shirt, walking around the park every morning, ringing his bell, starting at about 7 a.m., which is typically when I get there.
Fascinating.
Yeah, reporters are shepherded in. There's a main courtroom where some of our Bloomberg reporters are. And then there's a joint overflow room. And I've been in the overflow room.
So you haven't made eye contact with him yet?
No, I have not made eye contact with Donald Trump. I'm trying to, I don't know the last time he and I ran into each other was at a White House Correspondents dinner. The famous one where Obama.
That was a fateful night for our nation.
If we were to believe that that's when Donald Trump decided to make a comeback, but I think other things were at work. Yeah.
If he gets elected, is the White House Correspondents' dinner back on ice?
I imagine it is. He has always hated black tie events. He famously.
I thought he hated reporters.
He loves reporters. He hates bad coverage. He's a media addict. But he authentically hates charitable events and black tie events. And, Manhattan real estate, its lifeblood are these fundraisers that the elite of the real estate community go to. And I used to talk to him. I asked him a number of times, why don't you go to these? And he said, I hate those things. You wouldn't find me dead in a black tie. And then in very blue language, he described me what he'd rather be doing on a Saturday night that I can't share on your radio show.
Okay.
But I think he'd want nothing to do with the White House Correspondents' Dinner generally.
Is this wearing on him, or is he emboldened by being in court 4 days a week?
I think the answer is yes to both of those questions, but for different reasons. It is absolutely wearing it. Donald Trump has aged so significantly, even since, I think, 2022, but certainly since 2020 and definitely since 2016. He's a little more hunched over. His hair is getting harder to paste in an effective peekaboo way on the top of his head. His eyes are pouchy and red. He is tired. As we know, he's nodding off, or at least going into some fugue state of meditation during the court proceedings. And he hates being there. He's not in control of the script. This is the worst reality TV show a reality TV star could ever participate in, and he can't control the proceedings. So and he doesn't want to go to jail for whatever bravado he puts out there. People close to him have said he does not want to go to jail. The testimony in this case, he had a porn star into the front office of the Trump Organization, which is on the 26th floor of Trump Tower, and his residence where his wife was nursing their 4-month-old child, Barron, is about 30 floors above that. I don't know that he wants any of that out in the public, and it's there now.
Wow.
So no, he doesn't like this. On the other hand, I think he also is happy to use it as a venue to make his case that he's a victim and he's being unfairly prosecuted.
I'm really glad you could join us today. I didn't realize it was your day off of court, Tim. Thank you for being there for us as you bring your thoughts to Bloomberg Opinion. Find him on the terminal, OPIN-GO, or at Bloomberg.com. Tim O'Brien, Bloomberg Opinion. Senior executive editor who, as I mentioned, wrote the book on Donald Trump, and it's great to get his view here. On social media, the former president, quote, "Contrary to the fake news media, I don't fall asleep during the crooked DA's witch hunt, especially not today. I simply close my beautiful blue eyes sometimes, listen intensely, and take it all in." Kind of like here on Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Following the release of this jobs report, the headline says it all. U.S. jobs post smallest gain in 6 months as unemployment rises. We got reaction earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio from the acting labor secretary, Julie Su. Here she is.
Wage gains continue to outpace inflation. That means that there's more money in workers' pockets. This is obviously, as you say, this is a sign of how good people feel. And a good job changes lives, and a good jobs with wages that are enough to sustain a family are really important. And we continue to combat inflation and high prices.
Reaction from the Labor Department today. Now let's get reaction from the White House. Joining us now from the North Lawn on Bloomberg TV and radio is Heather Boushey, a member of the Council of Economic Advisors. Heather, thank you so much for being here on Bloomberg. Obviously, while we did see some softening, perhaps it is not all too unexpected. The fact of the matter remains, though, that employment is something of a lagging indicator. If we're starting to see the softness show up in a more material way now, where do you expect that we will be by November?
Well, today's report is really good news. The acting secretary talked about it. We have seen this unemployment rate below 4% for a whopping 27 months. That's the longest stretch going back over half a century. And we don't see a lot of signs of softening. When you sort of dig under the hood, you look at the report, for example, we've seen that for women who are between the ages of 25 and 54, sort of the working age population, their labor force participation and their employment rates have hit series high, going back to 1948 when Rosie the Riveter went home. And of course, we also saw the black unemployment rate fall last month. So when you dig in, you actually see signs of people coming back into the labor force. You see, a strong labor market overall at that steady pace that we need to see at this point in the economic recovery.
So slow and steady have been the magic words from you from the get-go, Heather, as we've been talking about this since the very start of this administration. As we consider the idea of a soft landing, is this actually more the definition of stable growth?
This is what you want to see at this point in recovery. Our analysis at the Council of Economic Advisors is that you need about 100,000 jobs per month just to keep pace with population growth. And at 175,000, and 240 some odd thousand over the past 3 months, we are certainly above that basic pace. And, we continue to see healthy gains in wages. They've been abating in recent months, but certainly you see those steady gains, and particularly those stronger gains for the bottom 80% of the labor market that are production and non-supervisory employees. These are the kinds of gains that we want to see month after month, people being able to go out there and get a job, that low unemployment rate, those jobs that are being available, but yet not so hot that it's overheating the economy.
Well, Heather, speaking of what we've seen month over month, as you alluded to, the statistic, 27 months in a row with an unemployment rate below 4%. When you're modeling out what's going to happen to unemployment as we move forward, when are we going to be breaking above that 4% level?
Well, I'd like to see us break the next record in that streak, so it's not just going back for more than 50 years, but going back more than that. Certainly, the president's goal from day one was to get people back to work, keep that unemployment rate low. That is what helps boost wages across the country, makes it easy for folks who are out there who want a job to get into the labor market, to find that work, to switch jobs. And so we certainly want to see that unemployment rate kept in that low space. It's one of the goals of what we mean by a strong, stable jobs recovery. And I just want to emphasize that one of the things that we've seen that I think has been really impressive in this recovery, of course, has been that we've hit these historic lows for black unemployment rate, for in the gap in the unemployment rate across states. We aren't at those lows right this month, but we have seen those, over the past year. And being able to see this kind of recovery that's giving so much opportunity to people all across the country in a way that is equitable and is, reaching into pockets of the economy. This is exactly what the president wants to see. It's good for the American people.
Well, Heather, I fully understand that the president would like to see unemployment remaining below 4%. It's just a question of whether or not that's going to continue to be realistic if we're talking about policy that is still tight and the lagged effects of the tightening that we have seen starting to kick in more substantially. I just wonder if realistically you think unemployment can stay this low if rates still remain this high for much longer.
Well, I cannot comment on Fed policy, which I think is implicit in this question. I think, what we are looking to see is, the president has made all of these investments all across the United States, investments in infrastructure, investments in new technology and manufacturing and good jobs. And we are still seeing those play out. We have had these very high numbers for investment in the construction of new manufacturing facilities. We are seeing, shovels in the ground for all these infrastructure projects. And so I remain optimistic that as we see this recovery progress, we'll be able to keep this kind of steady job gains. We've been able to deliver this for years now, and this is the economy. It's been the little engine that could, but we have a lot of investment that still is yet to come, and hopefully that will give some strength to the labor market. And we're starting from a very solid foundation here.
Spending time with Heather Boushey, who's talking with us live from the White House on Bloomberg TV and radio. Heather, we started the program with a special conversation with the former St. Louis Fed President, Jim Bullard. By the way, this is not a question about Fed policy, don't worry. But he did say that a soft landing for the U.S. economy is in view. Do you agree at this point? Is it already happening? Is this the type of report that confirms that?
Well, as we have seen month after month, and I've talked to you and folks around the country about this is that kind of stable growth. A soft landing implies that we already know exactly what's happened, that it's in the rearview mirror, but we're living this in real time. So I think that as we watch the data, as we always do, this is the kind of the recovery we want to see. And of course, on top of it, we have seen that prices have come down 60% from their peak. We've actually seen over the past year the prices for some goods-facing consumers like milk and eggs and used cars and airline fares, those are lower than they were a year ago. So we have seen some relief for families over time. And I think combined, this is the kind of, trying to find that sweet spot where you keep growing and you keep adding jobs and you keep making sure that workers receive their fair pay.
Heather, we were speaking earlier this week with someone from the Groundwork Collaborative. It used to work alongside Elizabeth Warren when we were talking about the way that Fed policy, which I won't ask you to comment on directly what the Fed should do with this policy, but the way that it is transmitting in the economy. Now that we have seen something of a stagnation in progress in getting inflation down, it bears questioning whether or not actually just pure interest rate policy is going to be able to get us that last mile down to 2%, or is it going to take something else like more action from this administration?
Well, this president has remained committed to lowering, pain points for families in terms of prices across the economy. He's taken a series of steps, for example, on junk fees, making it possible for, consumers to not face those fees that just add up, those hidden fees. I often think of, what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has done with credit card fees for consumers. But that's just one example of the variety of ways that the president is focused on lowering prices. Think about what he's done to lower prescription drug prices, lower the price of insulin, lower the price of health care for families. All of this adds up and gives relief to families' pocketbooks. The president has been focused on creating these jobs and addressing real problems facing families all across the country.
Heather, it's hard to underscore the impact that immigration is having on our job market right now. It's borne out in the numbers, and I wonder to what extent the White House will make the case in the coming months, in the coming days, that immigration is an important driver of our job market and is in fact having an impact potentially for the better on inflation. How would you answer that?
Well, the president came into office. He had an immigration plan that he released on day one. He has worked to find sensible solutions here. Certainly what we want to see in the labor market is you want to see those folks who are on the sidelines who want to get into the labor force, get access to those jobs. It's why I pointed to the fact that you have this historic high in labor force participation among women between the ages of 25 to 54, and you've seen good numbers on labor force participation more generally. That's people coming into the labor market, seeing those economic opportunities.
Heather Boushey of the White House Council of Economic Advisors with us live from the North Lawn at the White House. Heather, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back to talk to us today on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu in New York. Kailey Leinz is in Washington. And Kailey, it's just a remarkable reminder on what a difference a single day's data could make on sentiment, if not interest rates themselves.
Yeah, I mean, think about the round trip we have made in terms of expectations for Fed cuts, which Heather Boushey would not talk to us about. We started the year thinking the Fed might cut up to 6 times. Yeah. Then we were down to 1 cut. It seems that we're pricing more of them back in on what many are saying is a Goldilocks jobs report. And we know, Joe, that President Biden is standing by his prediction last we heard.
That's right.
That there will be rate cuts this year.
Well, he may seem prescient at this point, and we all know this has a direct impact to what is happening on the campaign trail and where we're going to be, say, post-Labor Day, when people really start paying attention. Kailey, young people who are actually watching interest rates with hopes to buy their first home, people who are, of course, looking at the gas pump every time they need to fill up their car. All of that's going to really start combining and colliding into people making opinions that are going to last until November. So they are hoping, no matter what they can say or not say about the Fed, they're hoping that cuts are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to make a difference, the timing of those cuts. And of course, we heard from Chairman Powell in the press conference earlier this week saying they don't think about the political context at all. So all the market expectation that it would be hard to cut in September just ahead of the election or in November just after it, maybe that is not so much the case if you're actually sitting on the FOMC.
That's right. Let's assemble the panel to get their take on another important news day. Jeanne Zaino is with us. Of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst, joined today by Republican strategist Lisa Camooso Miller, the former RNC communications director and host of the Friday Reporter podcast. What's your take here, Jeanne? Goldilocks is a word we keep throwing around. The fact of the matter is a slowing job market, not exactly the greatest story for the White House to be telling, is exactly what they want, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think you could hear it in both your great interview with Heather Boushey and Julie Sue's comments. You can hear they are elated by this report. It is all good news. I mean, it was only, just a few days ago, people were saying we wouldn't see a cut until after the election. Now the possibility it may come earlier has opened up. So that is all good news for the White House. From a campaign perspective, I think the Biden campaign, and I know they will, has to keep their eye on the ball. You cannot tell people about good numbers. That is not going to work. So yes, all of his supporters and everything else, they know these numbers are good. But for the people on the ground in these key 7 states, this is more about talking about what Donald Trump has said. CNBC, he says he's going to cut Social Security. That has to go out. They have to be focusing on the threat Donald Trump is to the economy, not trying to sell Joe Biden's accomplishments. Let the data speak for itself and talk about the threat that is looming if people vote for Donald Trump, rather. That's the campaign strategy.
Well, certainly when the data was looking better than it is now, when we were talking of payrolls growth north of 300,000 plus, he still wasn't getting credit for the economy. So I understand that sentiment. Jeanne, does that mean, Lisa, for Republicans, the economy is going to be the best issue if Biden can't talk about it or talk about it well enough, frame it well enough for voters to actually give him credit for it? Then that's all opportunity to the other side.
Absolutely, Kailey. I mean, I think more than anything, Jeanne took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, regardless of how good the numbers are, you can't tell people how the economy is performing if they don't feel that way. And so that's why we talk about consumer sentiment and we talk about a variety of other things, because that's really the way that people approach Election Day, right? So Republicans will be doing everything they can to define and continue to define this White House as not being good on the economy, even though the data says otherwise. And so this is the word versus word game that's going to happen between now and November in a way that's going to get harder and more difficult to navigate. So sure, in the playbook for Republicans, it's to talk about how Joe Biden's not great for the economy. And in the playbook for the Democrats, they're going to do the same and talk about how Donald Trump is not doing, would not do what he needs to do in order to continue to grow it.
Well, so let's distill this conversation into a simple question, Jeanne Zaino. Does Joe Biden need interest rate cuts to win re-election?
They would be amazing, Joe Mathieu. That would be great. He's hoping for them. He would probably tell you he doesn't need them. He can't control them. The economy, of course, is going to matter. But again, there is no majority out there just so excited to vote for Joe Biden. So the way they have to frame this electorally is Donald Trump the threat to everything Joe Biden has achieved. And, it's hard for us not to talk about our own individual accomplishments, which is what this campaign wants to do. And Joe Biden, look, I did this, this, and this. Stop it. Don't talk about what you've done. Talk about what the other guy will do. You're the incumbent. This is a referendum on you. He is a threat to what you've achieved, but you got to stop talking about achievements and focus on threat. There's no plainer way to say it. And they have the benefit of it, having an opponent who should keep his mouth shut and let the attention be on Joe Biden, but always wants to talk about himself. So let him.
And of course, he's in court again today. We'll probably hear from him as he's walking out at the end of the proceedings today. As usual, Jeanne, Zaino, and Lisa Camooso Miller will be sticking with us. We have much more to discuss with them, including, Joe, another big problem for President Biden. The economy is not the only issue on the list for this incumbent president. Increasingly, it is his policy toward Israel and the ramifications of that, including what we have seen playing out on college campuses across the country.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm Joe Mathieu in New York. Kailey Leinz is in Washington. Coming up, we're going to spend some time with Jessica Kavanaugh of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace with the latest on a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Right now, it's a pleasure, though, to bring in my colleague here in New York, Anne-Marie Hordern, with an important conversation we've been looking forward to. A member of Parliament is with us here at World Headquarters, Alex Burkhart, and Anne-Marie will hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. That's right. I'm joined by Alex Burkhart, UK Cabinet Office Minister, leading on AI in the public sector. I want to start out with your role in artificial intelligence. This role wouldn't exist even as 2-3 years ago, and I used to live in the United Kingdom. We've seen this government, led by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, really want to invest and hone AI, even within the government. I know you're in the beta mode of this red box. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what you're focused on, and how the government could potentially harness this.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and thank you for having me on. And it's great to be in New York to talk about the work we're doing in the UK government at the moment. As you've said, the Prime Minister is really passionate about AI. We held the first AI Safety Summit that the world has seen last year, very, very productive. But the work that I'm doing is on how we can deploy AI for the public good. And that means how we can, it was about 18 months ago, we sat down and said, this new technology is emerging, potentially one of the great leaps forward. How are we going to harness it to improve the quality of public services and drive down costs for the taxpayer? And there's a number of ways in which that's emerging. And the first is that you can now automate tasks like never before. And I have, you mentioned Red Box, which is named after the red ministerial box that British ministers carry around.
I still hope they'll do that for show in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And but what we now have, what we've been building, is a tool that can summarize huge documents very, very quickly, that can relate them to what's been going on in Parliament, what's been going on in the press, and can pull out kind of key points that ministers need to focus on. And that's saving my private office hundreds of hours. But it's also starting to build a tool that is going to create institutional memory, recreate institutional memory in our government departments. So, when we're starting out on a project, we'll be able to ask, have we tried something like this before? Why didn't we carry on with it? What was good about it? And so that huge resource of documentation that's currently lying unused in government is going to come back into play.
So 2 questions immediately come to mind. One, talent, and the other, security. Let's start with talent first. If you work in AI, you can get paid handsomely going to, say, OpenAI. Yep. How do you attract that talent to, say, come work as a civil servant? It's
a great question. We were really worried about this at the start because we can't pay that money. And I've got a really great head of the program, Laura Gilbert, who's out in New York with me at the moment. And she said, as long as we can pay something, a bit more than we pay our normal civil servants, what we have is data. We have really good data, lots of centralized data. And if you are, an AI addict, if you're one of these super smart, crazy clever people who wants to get involved, the thing you want to play with is data. And And so we've been looking at huge quantities of data, things like public prescriptions, health service, looking how we can improve the quality of prescriptions, drive down cost. We've been looking at how we can eliminate fraud and error in the benefit system. We have £280 billion benefit and pension system, and we currently employ thousands and thousands of people to check for fraud. We think we're going to be able to vastly reduce that and improve.
So attracting that talent hasn't been an issue?
No, we've been really pleasantly surprised that loads of people have applied and they've passed our very, very stringent tests to get in.
The one concern as well is security. You put all of this now, documents that live in a cloud, you're working more with AI. How do you safeguard that to, say, adversaries?
Yeah, it's a central question. And we have a very effective security service in the UK. And we're constantly learning from partners. I was out in Tallinn in Estonia, right on the fringes of NATO a few weeks ago, learning from them because they were party to some enormous cyber attacks a few years ago and have become very, very resilient. So it's uppermost in our mind when we're vetting people, but also when we're building systems to make sure that they're not, they can't be attacked by enemy operators.
If you use AI in the defense sector in the UK government, how important is it that all that technology comes in-house, not out of house, because of these concerns?
No, I think it's not just defense, right? When we were starting out, we could easily have gone and picked a number of big companies, big UK companies who have fantastic AI sector in London. But we wanted to understand this technology ourselves. So we've hired this crack team of 30 people, going up to 70, who are going to be able to build bespoke systems for us. Now, in the future, I think there'll be a case of some stuff we will build ourselves and use many times. Some stuff we will build bespoke for particular departments, perhaps like defense. And some things we will buy in. But having people who actually know how it works and know what government's needs are, I think is central to getting this revolution right.
I know you're in New York, so you're missing all the morning press in the UK after a critical election last night. And, you saw the bellwether parliamentary seat that the Conservatives lost. Do you honestly think the Conservative Party, if the elections are going to be held this year at some point, I know the Prime Minister said at the second half of the year, do you think the current Conservatives will be able to hold on to power? I
do think they will be able to. And I'll tell you what, look, we've had a tough night. The truth is that in 2021, when this cycle of elections was last on, it was we had a vaccine bounce. That was a very good year for us. We always suspected we might come down. But there is a silver lining to this cloud, and it's the fact that Ben Houchin, our mayor in Teesside in the northeast, traditionally quite a deprived part of the country, which under the Conservatives is now flourishing. He's won, he's held on, he's done a very good job there. And I think when it comes to the election, when people actually have to make a choice about who they want to see in power for the next 5 years, is it going to be the Prime Minister and the Conservatives that has got us through COVID, that has seen off inflation and the energy crisis and has a plan for the future, or is it going to be a Labour Party that really has no plan and no agenda? I think they're going to come with us.
Do you now regret, though, potentially removing Boris Johnson just from an electability point of view?
No, I don't, because Boris certainly had his strengths, but things weren't working out, and he made some mistakes, and we couldn't have pretended that those mistakes hadn't happened.
Besides AI, which I know the Prime Minister is really focused on, but a lot of that feels a little bit like it's not tangible yet to voters and the electorate. What does Rishi Sunak need to do? Number one thing he needs to do going into this election?
So I think there are some really good stories to tell. I mentioned Teesside up in the northeast. When I was the Minister for Skills, I was lucky enough to be part of this great piece of work where Ben Houchin, the mayor, persuaded the energy companies to come in and build hydrogen plants on the condition that they offered training courses for young boys and girls in the local colleges. So you have, the government setting up a free port in Teesside, the mayor bringing in the business, and then the business securing the training places so that young people get those new jobs in their community. And that is what we call levelling up in the UK. And we're starting to see the fruits of it. New business in towns which have been left behind and local people getting those jobs and adding to the prosperity of the places where they live. That's something that didn't happen under 13 years of Labour. It's happening under the Conservatives, and I've been proud to be part of it.
Do you want to break some news? Do you know when the election will be?
Well, I'd love to tell you, but the Prime Minister...
You don't know yet?
I don't know yet.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That was Alex Burkhart, UK Cabinet Officer Minister, leading on AI in the public sector. Joe, Kailey?
Anne-Marie Hordern, live in New York. Thank you so much for the great conversation, Anne-Marie.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
This is something that perhaps the administration is trying to hang their hats on, Joe, the continued strength, it seems, of the U.S. economy. But, of course, they're facing a number of other headwinds as well, as we continue to see campus protests, pro-Palestinian protests across the country and abroad, still efforting a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas that to this point has not yet come to fruition.
Well, that's true. Kailey, you and I started this week on Monday with talk of an imminent announcement like that day or night, and it's been 5 days and we're still waiting. So now a new clock is ticking. An important headline this morning in the Wall Street Journal: Israel gives Hamas a week to strike a deal on a Rafah offensive will begin. And it gets us back to this idea, or question at least, whether Rafah is a bargaining chip or indeed something that Israel is telegraphing will happen. Kailey, we're lucky to be joined by Jennifer Kavanaugh right now, Senior Fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And it's great to have you with us, Jennifer. We have a lot of questions about what's happening right now, including the status of talks now that a Hamas delegation is joining the situation in Cairo. What do you expect to happen this weekend?
Well, I heard the same report that you did, that Hamas has indicated that they are willing to continue negotiations. So there's still a chance for a deal. But there are a number of stumbling blocks, one of which you just mentioned, which is the fact that Netanyahu has made it clear that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, intends to move on Rafah whether or not there is a deal, which really reduces Hamas's incentive to strike any sort of accord, given that it doesn't seem to buy them anything in the long term. Of course, the other stumbling block is the lack of a real plan for the future of Gaza. What happens if this is not a long-term ceasefire, or if it is, to Gaza in the long term? And those are things I think that are likely weighing on the minds of Hamas leaders as they're going into these negotiations.
Well, so Jennifer, it's interesting that you raise the incentives or perhaps lack thereof for Hamas, knowing that perhaps Israel will be moving into Rafah either way, that if they release hostages, they are losing some of the leverage that they have remaining. Why would Hamas agree to a temporary ceasefire at this point?
Well, it's possible that they would see an advantage to having some time to rebuild their forces or to solidify their grounds before Israel moved in. So it's possible that that is one way they're thinking. Another is that this idea that even a temporary ceasefire could become permanent. There have been some who have indicated that even on the Israeli side, there's a recognition that a temporary ceasefire would likely be a permanent one. So there's the potential that that Netanyahu's threat to move on Rafah, regardless of a deal, is just that, it's a bluff, and that what starts as a temporary ceasefire would become permanent. But that raises a whole host of other questions about what that means for the long term. And there's a lot of uncertainty for Hamas. Another big news item this week was this idea of a Israeli-Saudi normalization deal. And it's hard to see how that moves forward without a plan for a permanent Palestinian state. But Israel has indicated that it's not interested in moving in that direction either. So from Hamas's perspective, there's definitely an incentive to keep the talks going in hopes that they can delay any sort of further military operation. But it's hard to see what the incentives are for actually striking that deal without a lot more information to give on the Israeli side.
Jennifer, does the arrival potentially this weekend, is what we're hearing, of a temporary pier to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, the U.S. military, of course, building that as we speak, does it change the dynamic at all in these talks? Does it increase the chance for a ceasefire once it's up and running?
I'm not sure that really factors in all that much. I mean, the most efficient way to get aid into Gaza is with trucks over land borders. So the pier will offer some temporary relief, possibly. But even if that aid starts arriving this weekend, it's going to face delays in actually getting into the hands of population, because it's still not really clear how that aid is going to get from the pier to the population. And the big bottlenecks are the security checks of that aid as it moves from the pier onto land. And there's no protocol yet or procedures that have been outlined for how that process is going to occur that's going to be faster than what's already been put in place. So I'm not sure that factors in, although it certainly would be beneficial for the Gaza population in the long term to be able to get access to more aid.
Well, you raised the question of perhaps bottlenecks that could arise once things are off the pier. There's also just the question of the security of the pier itself. This is something that the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, was asked about earlier in Honolulu, and this was his response.
The first question was regarding any credible information that we have that Hamas is going to attack our troops. Of course, I don't discuss intelligence information at the podium, but I don't see any indications currently that there is an active intent to do that. Having said that, Phil, this is a combat zone, and a number of things can happen, a number of things will happen.
A number of things, Jennifer, he said, can and will happen. Could this pier be something of an impetus for actual U.S. troops getting involved in a more material way if indeed there were to be an attack?
Well, there's certainly the risk that could happen. That's one of the criticisms that has arisen of the plan for this pier since the start, is that it's not clear how U.S. troops are going to be protected and how they're going to keep them from being on the land. Which then could signal a larger U.S. role in this conflict than the Defense Department has indicated it intends to have, or that it wants to have. One of Hamas's goals has been throughout this conflict to separate Israel from its Western support. So attacking U.S. forces and sort of forcing this decision of how in Israel's camp is the United States willing to be, certainly could be a tactic. And so attacks on the pier are certainly not out of the question in terms of trying to force the U.S. hand in that way. At the same time, I don't think any player involved in this conflict, whether it's the United States, Hamas, Iran, Israel, wants to see an escalation to any sort of regional conflict. Hamas certainly would like to have de-escalation, not escalation, and so that could weigh on the other side of keeping them from putting any pressure on U.S. forces.
Jennifer, what happens if, as some are predicting, Israel opens a new front to the north? What happens to talks with Hamas if Israel attacks Hezbollah?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question, but I think the better question is whether or not Israel can really resource a second front without additional U.S. support. And my estimate is probably not. If Israel decides to open a second front, that opens a number of hard questions for the United States about how far it's willing to lean in terms of providing offensive military equipment to the United States, to Israel. And that's already been a contentious issue in the United States, with some senators calling for conditions on aid. And putting pressure on President Biden to come out more strongly in terms of leaning on the leverage that the United States gains from providing military aid in terms of reining Netanyahu in to limit this conflict, to prevent it from becoming a regional one, which is a real risk if Israel were to move into Lebanon.
Well, Jennifer, as you talk about the idea of limiting aid, certainly there is a chunk of people in the U.S. right now, including some members of Congress, who would not like to see the U.S. continuing to provide unconditional aid to Israel because of concern around Palestinian life and what's happening in Gaza. And certainly that has shown up on college campuses across the country, as we have seen what was a pro-Palestinian movement perhaps morphing into something that could have more anti-Semitism involved. What effect do you think the visuals and the rhetoric around these protests is actually having with the situation, or on the situation on the ground in the Middle East? Is that something that emboldens Hamas? Does it embolden Israel, make them more secure in the notion that they have to fight vigorously for their right to exist? How do you view that?
I could see it as possibly emboldening Hamas in the sense that it is eroding the global credibility and reputation of both the United States and Israel, which is one of the long-term goals of these groups. For Israel, seeing global protests against the way the war has been conducted certainly helps shift public opinion against them and limit their flexibility to continue the war. And for the United States, it raises questions about a double standard. Some countries across the global South especially have been very critical of what they see as a double standard between the way the United States has responded to Israel's conduct of its war in Gaza and Russia's conduct of its war in Ukraine, which the United States has come out very strongly against. Now, there are obviously very significant differences between those two conflicts, but that connection has been made, and that narrative, which has been fueled by disinformation and by Russian sources and by anti-Israel sources, has taken hold, and that can have an impact on U.S. influence across places in Africa and other parts of the Middle East as well.
All right, Jennifer Kavanaugh, great to have you on Balance of Power today. Thank you so much for joining us. She, of course, is a senior fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.